In medieval times, if a knight wanted to challenge another knight, he would throw down the gauntlet, a sort of armoured glove. And if the other person picked it up, that meant that they accepted the challenge. They would fight a duel. Well, Job has now thrown down the gauntlet to God. He has challenged God to give some answers. Why are you treating me like this? I've lived righteously and yet I'm suffering terribly. My friends say it's because you're punishing me for some great evil that I've done, but I haven't done the things that they say. And yet you've brought suffering, you've brought disaster. It seems that you're against me for no reason. I can't understand it. And so he accuses God of injustice. It comes close to blasphemy. Righteous people suffer, and yet the wicked get off lightly. And so he's issued this challenge: prove the case against me or clear my name, please. Today we're going to see that God takes up the gauntlet. At last he speaks and he answers Job. And we're going to look at what the Lord himself says in chapters 38 to 41. There are 2 points today. God is speaking, and are you listening? Firstly, God is speaking. Throughout the whole book of Job, we've been waiting with bated breath to hear if God will speak, if God will give some answers. The 3 friends of Job failed, they dried up. And then our hopes were raised when this new character, Elihu, came on the scene in chapter 32. Would this young man talk some sense? Would he give some answers now? Some new insights? Well, yes, he does, but there's great disappointment. It seems that the reason why he is there is to keep us in suspense, to prepare us for what God himself will say. God makes no comment on what Elihu said, either positively or negatively. Instead, he directs words towards Job. He picks up on what he said earlier. In verse 1 of chapter 38, then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, who is this who darkens counsel by words without knowledge? So finally, God himself speaks out of the whirlwind. Several times in the Old Testament, God speaks out of a whirlwind. But what he says may not be what you're expecting. It wasn't what Job or his friends were expecting. Although it doesn't answer his or our questions directly, it does put everything in perspective. What was Job expecting to hear? He was waiting for God to vindicate him, to pronounce that he's innocent. What were Job's 3 friends wanting to hear? They were waiting for God to condemn Job, to pass sentence on him, to bring judgment. We might have been expecting God to give us an answer to that age-old problem of suffering, to tell us why bad things happen to good people, to explain himself and his ways. But he doesn't do any of those things. Instead, he takes Job and us on a guided tour of the universe. God speaks about clouds and waves and all creatures great and small. The lion, the ostrich, great creatures of the land and the sea. He introduces us to what has been described as a carnival of animals. What's that got to do with the big questions of life that Job is asking and that we're asking? Carl Jung, the theologian, says that God here is being a bully, that he is taunting Job and taunting us. R.A. Mackenzie says it's like shaking a rattle at a crying child to divert his attention from his hunger pangs. Is that what God is doing? Surely not. He's not being cruel. He's speaking as a father to a son. He's gently correcting. There's no harshness here in his words. as a parent might lovingly reprove a child for his outbursts, even with a smile. Oh, you are a funny one. He's making Job think about his own words carefully, to follow through his own reasoning, to see his own foolishness. And the Lord uses humour, he uses irony. Where were you, he asks Job in verse 4. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding. Surely you were there, he says. Surely you know these things. When God speaks, he doesn't always give you the direct answers you expect. In a roundabout way, he brings us to where we need to be in our thinking, so that we will think things through for ourselves. And that way, his truth makes a difference in your life or in my life. He doesn't mention Job's suffering or the reasons for it. He knows that he will soon take away his suffering, but he has something more important to say. He doesn't directly answer Job or the others. Why should he? He is speaking as God, as the Creator, as the one who rules over everything, over all his creation. In these chapters, God makes two speeches. In chapters 38 and 39, we see that God is Lord over nature. He's creator of the earth. Verses 4 to 7. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? To what were its foundations fastened? Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Yes, he's the creator of the earth and also of the sea. Verses 8 to 11. Or who shut in the sea with doors when it burst forth and issued from the womb? When I made the clouds its garment and thick darkness its swaddling band. And he's the creator of day and night. Verses 12 to 15. Have you commanded the morning since your days began and caused the dawn to know its place? He's the Lord of the inanimate creation, non-living things. Verses 16 to 18. Have you entered the springs of the sea? Or have you walked in search of the depths? Have the gates of death been revealed to you? Or have you seen the doors of the shadow of death? Have you comprehended the breadth of the earth? Tell me if you know all this. He's the creator of the weather. Verse 22 and verses 25 and 26. He speaks of the treasury of snow and the treasury of hail, and the channel for overflowing water and the path of the thunderbolt and rain falling on the land. He orders the movement of stars and planets. Verse 31. Can you bind the cluster of the Pleiades or loose the belt of Orion? Some of the constellations that we now know are mentioned here in the book of Job. Even death, the invisible and spiritual realm, is under the command of the Lord. In verse 17, have the gates of death been revealed to you, or have you seen the doors of the shadow of death? He's the Lord not only of the inanimate creation, but of the animate creation, living things. Chapter 38, verse 39. Can you hunt the prey for the lion or satisfy the appetite of the young lions? He mentions ravens in verse 41, the mountain goats and the deer, the wild donkey, verse 5 of chapter 39, the wild ox, verse 9, the auroch, probably an animal that is now extinct, but was hunted by the Egyptians and the Assyrians. It had huge 6 feet wide shoulders. The point is that this creature is too big for you to handle or tame. It's not for us to be able to control these things. The Lord rules over the ostrich, the most unusual creature. Too big to fly, it runs faster than a horse and its rider, verse 18. It's a paradox in nature. It seems to be a contradiction. And there are paradoxes in life. There are things that you just cannot understand. But the Lord knows. He gives the horse its strength for battle. So by using these illustrations from creation, both inanimate and animate creation, the Lord is showing that he, not Job, not us, he is the one who is in control, the one who has understanding of these things. And therefore, if we want help, we need to look to him. So God is Lord over nature. But then in chapters 40 and 41, God is Lord over the moral realm, over good and evil. Again, the Lord doesn't give Job the answers that he's expecting. Job had wanted God to name the charges against him. He imagined taking God to court. And yet God doesn't come like a lawyer and set out the case against Job. There is no case to answer. Job is not suffering because of something that he has done. Job has criticised God's way of ruling the universe. It appears unfair. And God says, almost with a smile, "Well, Job, perhaps you would do a better job of ruling over the universe. Perhaps you have more of an idea about justice than I do. Why don't you take over the reins for a while and see how you manage? Have a go, Job. Prepare yourself. I am going to interview you for the job of judge of all the earth." Chapter 40 and verse 7. "Now prepare yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me." And verse 8. "Would you indeed annul my judgment? Would you condemn me, that you may be justified?" Now, Job, what would you do with the proud and the wicked? What do you suggest? Would you bring judgment against them? Would you destroy them? That's what you said I should do. Is that what you would do? Verse 11. "Disperse the rage of your wrath. Look on everyone who is proud and humble him." If I were to wipe out all who had done evil, tell me this, Job, where would you stand? Are you perfect? Are you without any sin? Don't you think it might be a good thing that I do not deal immediately with every sin? Let's stop for a minute and imagine what would happen if God did that. People sometimes say, don't they, why doesn't God put a stop to wickedness? Well, what if he did? What about your wickedness? Your evil thoughts? Your unkind words? Your hurtful actions? Your selfishness and pride and lack of love? And I'm not pointing a finger at you that I do not point at myself. What if God did deal with those things? Your failure to give God the worship he deserves or the service that you owe to him. What should God do about all of that? David realised the problem in Psalm 143. "In your faithfulness, answer me, and in your righteousness. Do not enter into judgment with your servant, for in your sight no one living is righteous." It's a mercy that God does not deal with you straight away as your sins deserve. He is patient and gracious. He waits. He gives you an opportunity to repent and to turn to him. But if you don't take that opportunity, if you don't come back to him, if you leave it too late, then judgment does come in the end. So Job begins to realise that such matters are way, way beyond him, far, far above him. He feels out of depth. He feels foolish for even suggesting that he could know better than God. He's been looking at the world, as Bill Cotton says, from a worm's eye view. God is now giving him a bird's eye or even a divine eye view of the universe. And it's too much for him. Job is too small for such big matters. And to press home the point, the Lord brings in two very big creatures, much bigger than Job. Behemoth is mentioned in chapter 40, this great beast that lives on the land, and Leviathan in chapter 41, a great beast that lives in the water. What were they? Some think that Behemoth is a description of the hippopotamus, and Leviathan must be the crocodile. But that doesn't seem to fit the description. A hippo's tail is hardly like a cedar tree, and a crocodile is not one that can't be killed with a spear or javelin. It seems to me that these creatures are much bigger than anything that's alive today. Are they just mythical creatures? Is this just poetic language? Well, perhaps not, because God says he created Behemoth, just as he created Job, chapter 40 and verse 15. Whatever these creatures were, they were real creatures. They were made alongside man in the beginning. We now know from fossils and bones that have been discovered that there were once very large creatures that are no longer living today. Are these descriptions telling us of creatures like dinosaurs? But clearly they were creatures that lived alongside man. We don't have to fall in with the theories of evolution. But there's also a symbolic meaning in these descriptions, because symbolically they represent powers on earth and spiritual powers that threaten us and make us afraid. In Revelation chapter 12, it mentions the dragon, representing Satan. And in chapter 13, a beast rising from the land and from the sea. It's describing Satan and forces of evil in our world. I think that meaning is certainly there. We're meant to associate the dragon, the Leviathan, with Satan. We've already had a glimpse of Satan's activity in the first 2 chapters of the book of Job. But the point is, these evil forces are too strong, they're too great for Job to control. But they're not too great or too strong for the Lord to control. They're no match for him. And so we need to get things in perspective. Job needs to get things in perspective. You can't control good or evil, but God can. God is speaking. He is telling you. He is Lord over nature, not you. He is Lord over the moral realm, not you. Therefore, leave it to him. Leave it to him to govern his creation. Leave it to him to judge his creation. These things are too big for your human mind. God is speaking. But our final question, as we apply all of this teaching to ourselves, is, are you listening? Are you listening to what God is really saying? How does Job respond to what God says? What's his reaction? Is he angry? Does he still want to put God in the dock? Well, in chapter 40 and verse 4, he says, "Behold, I am vile. What shall I answer you? I lay my hand over my mouth. Once I have spoken," verse 5, "but I will not answer. Yes, twice, but I will proceed no further." He's silenced. He's humbled. He realizes he's spoken out of turn. And he winces and he squirms as God gives him the opportunity to say how he would do it better. He puts his hand over his mouth. I've been so stupid. And again in chapter 42, and we'll look at that next time. As far as Job is concerned, and as far as the book of Job is concerned, God, not Job, is the hero of the story. God is shown to be right and wise and good. Job had wanted God to explain himself, but if he did, our minds could not take it in. If God did explain, Job would be bombarded by thousands of questions that he just could not understand. And so he must realise who God is. He's bigger than you. You can't understand him or his ways. You must just learn to trust that he knows, that he is in control, that he does what is good and what is right. Job has come to realise that God is not acting as his enemy, but as his friend. In 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 12 to 19, we read this. Beloved, do not think it strange concerning the fiery trial which is to try you, as though some strange thing happened to you. Therefore, let those who suffer according to the will of God commit their souls to him, in doing good, as to a faithful Creator. So, God doesn't give you a direct answer to the problem of suffering. Instead, he does what he did with Job. He reveals to you who he really is. He invites you to meet with him, to have a personal encounter with the living God, your Creator, and the ruler over your life. What you need is not intellectual answers to the problem of suffering. What you need is to know God. Do you have such a real faith? Have you met with God? Do you know him? For you it has been made easier than for Job. God has made himself known to you in the person of Jesus Christ, his Son. He has come to earth to show who God really is, to give his life as an offering for sin, and to rise again from the dead. And it's through believing in him that you can have everlasting life. He is God. You are not. It's time to stop struggling against him and to submit to him. God is Lord over nature. He's Lord over the moral realm. He's Lord over this world and over your life. Will you have him to be Lord over your life?